Hello, hello everyone. How are you? Are you all doing well? I had to remember to hide the player on Stream Manager, otherwise I would hear myself talking, and then I would struggle to even be able to say a word. I hope you're all doing well. I had quite the busy day today. Uh, Hello Hanbun, go Rua, go. Thank you. I intended to do either ASMR or uh, gaming this stream, but I was kind of busy. I didn't get to work too much on stuff or kind of figure some things out regarding, uh, how to set up a good gaming scene. So I decided we'll just continue with the reading today of Troy, or the Trojan War. Uh, as I said, I was a little bit busy. I had to be up and doing stuff, helping some friends with something, as well as going to singing lessons. So that was quite fun. Um, Although it was just, unfortunately, I had to be online. Usually it's in person, but they're quite enjoyable, I have to say. Although, although being made to sing in my higher register is a little tricky. Excuse me, I had a thing of Coke Zero earlier, and I can feel it wanting to come up, and I don't want to burp into your guys' ears. That would be ugh. But yes, and then I also had to fit in the gym and reading my new, well, not new book. Well, actually, yeah, no, it is probably my most recent book. Um, just trying to find time to do stuff. I think once I start work proper once again, and I'm doing training and stuff, I'll have to really get my time schedule in order to make sure that I'm able to stream regularly and that I have time to do 2 to 3 hours. But I've had a pretty good day. I think it was nice being back in the gym. I did some back and biceps today, and then just did a short run on the treadmill. Hanbun, how have you been? Have you been well? Oh, actually, I did forget one small thing. Uh, a certain place to to shill myself. Hang on a moment. There we go. That should be all good. No. Capture eye. I just realized something. No, it's not too bad. It's all good. Okay. Okay. So I think. Oh yes, actually, I guess I'll talk a little bit because I mentioned it. I'll talk a little bit about the singing lessons I had. So yeah, I'm trying to work on my upper range, which isn't that high. I'll be honest. But we're working on Luther Vandross's Never Too Much, and we have a way of my teacher showed me a way of uh, transposing it down a bit so that it's a little bit easier because trying to sing up to that level is so difficult. It starts to just get screechy when I do that. Um, but I'm definitely enjoying it, and I definitely think she kind of picked a point, a certain range that does still feel relatively comfortable. But then in the chorus, when it goes up a bit, it's definitely kind of pushing me to make sure my breath is good, and um, it's I'm starting to go into head voice a little. And then of course there's that little bit where Luther Van Ross does that sort of breathy breathy singing that just sounds so nice when he does it, and uh, not so nice when I do it. But so yeah, I'm hoping to do some kind of singing stream in the future. I think it could be a lot of fun. Although I'd probably stick with the songs that are more comfortably in my range, but I could give Never Too Much a try. I might do. Hmm, yeah, we'll see how it works. But back to the Trojan War as a quick um, review of what we read about yesterday. We learned a little bit about the sailing of the black ships, the supposedly, what was it, 1,182 ships, although from the book, from the books and Thucydides' ideas, it's more likely that it was somewhere in the range of 300, possibly 400, depending on merchant vessels and other necessities that the men would have brought with them. We learned about the types of Greek sailing ships, from merchant vessels to small galleys to, well, the main galley, the, what was it called again? The Pentacata, I believe. It was something like that, a 50 oared ship, as well as learning a little bit about how they organized their military, their navies, and such. And we learned a little bit about how the Greeks at this time period were essentially the Vikings of their age. They were dominant. They excelled in controlling the seas and controlling the Aegean islands, being able to hit and strike wherever they so pleased due to the speed and versatility of their well, navy. We hear about how the Egyptians, or the Hittites, one of them anyway, complained about how a group of 6 or 7. Oh no, wait, this was supposedly of Troy, or at least of the cities around that area of the Troad. So yes, it would have been Hittite or Hittite related complaints that a group of 6 or 7 ships had attacked and raided so much of the coastal cities around that area, which seems to line up with some of the supposed stories of Achilles having raided as the leader of the Myrmidons along the area, and supposedly he razed Troy, although it's probably more likely that rather than attacking the city itself, he simply took the outlanding areas. A small group of 6 men would probably struggle to take a city. We also learned a little bit about Troy, that despite being in such a prime area of the navy, its own navy was quite weak, instead focusing more on cavalry and on infantry on the land area. And thus they were unable to really promote any sort of power or project any sort of power into the sea that could have possibly rivaled the Greek armada that came to descend upon them. They were middlemen, ultimately, and middlemen sometimes spend much more time in developing productive resources that gets them more money, rather than investing into military and other useful things that might allow them to continue to secure their foothold and where they are, making them prime pickings for the Greek raiders. And we also learned a little bit about how the Greeks would have decided to likely land on the beaches of the Dardanelles, and the struggles of fighting on the beaches, the melee that it would have become, no easy lines of men facing each other in planned combat, but rather chaos, archers and slingers throwing into groups of men fighting on the beaches, the psychology of seeing ships crashing down and men jumping down and attacking you right from the start for the Trojans, who would have not have been as practiced in defending seas or beachheads, as the Greeks would have been in taking them. And ultimately the Greeks were successful in taking the beachhead and forming a camp. The next section of the book speaks about an assault on the walls. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing a bit about what that is about. You may have realised actually that I changed the topic of the stream to be ASMR. I think it's probably more suited to the style of this. So I hope that anyone who comes in enjoys either the historical reading or simply is able to relax and be comfy. So we begin. Chapter 4. Assault on the Walls. The bolts are pulled back into their sockets, and double-doored doors, wooden, plated with metal, and tightly fitted together, swing open. The travellers enter the city, passing quickly and quietly through the defences of Troy. If these walls could talk, they would scream. They would cry havoc, and let the generals roar for victory, and the fugitives shout for ropes to pull them up, and the sappers to give out war whoops as they hack away with their bronze tools. But today the walls are dead silent, a mass of stone and earth that won't be breached without blood. The travellers are heading in the opposite direction from the one in which traffic usually moves at this early hour, when the herdsmen head out of town with their goats, sheep, and cattle. But these are unusual times, with an enemy army camped on the rich pasture land of Troy. Homer describes the outcome of the travellers' journey. Let us imagine their trip. Odysseus, son of Laertus, and king of Ithaca, has the build of a boxer and the eyes of a hunter. He wears a trim beard and long hair cut short in front, so as not to give the enemy something to grab onto in battle. He is dressed in a glossy tunic beneath a heavy woolen cloak, with double folds, coloured purple. The folds are clasped by a solid gold brooch, incised with an image of a hound killing a fawn. The expression on his face is a mask. It is no more insincere than the language of brotherhood in which royal scribes couch ultimatums, and no trickier than the nighttime troop movements by which Bronze Age generals steal a march on the enemy. War is deception. No one knows this better than Odysseus. His travelling companion Menelaus might dream of avenging his honour, but Odysseus just wants to win. The expression on his face is a riddle. Not so that of Menelaus, whose eyes glow with anger. The two men ride in separate two-horse chariots, driven by trusted friends. They are escorted by a detachment of heavily armed spearmen, but not from their own army. The escorts are Trojans, and they are leading a Greek delegation. The soldiers are elite troops, wearing Bronze Age armour, shining for the parade ground. They are protecting the city from the Greeks, and the Greeks from the city. Let the long-haired Greeks see the strength of Troy's walls, but not the weak spots in need of repair. And don't let the Trojans and their wives, whose garments sweep the ground, see who is suddenly within reach of vengeance. The Greeks have just arrived in the country, but they have already created refugees and mourners. The two visiting kings are not likely to have reacted in the same way. Menelaus's blood might have been boiling at the thought that he was in Troy, where his adulterous wife was dishonouring his name and her lover was cuckolding him and defying the gods. Paris had violated the laws of Zeus himself, the god of hospitality and strangers. Odysseus was an accomplished sacker of cities and a born scout, the most cunning man in the Greek army. We may imagine him consumed less by anger than by curiosity. The paved streets, the wide courtyards, the exotic statuettes of the bull that represented the army's god, the veiled women, the wind that blew stronger the higher they climbed on Troy's hill. Nothing would have escaped the scrutiny of the man of many ways, as Homer calls him. Ancient Near East etiquette demanded that a king lay down an official challenge to his opponent. It was unmanly, said a Hittite king, to start a war with a sneak attack. The Greeks came, therefore, to give the Trojans one last chance for peace. The alternative was enmity and death, or so they said. A razor-sharp Trojan might have known that the Hittite practice of sending an envoy who held two sets of instructions, a tablet of war and a tablet of peace. One tablet threatened the enemy, but the other proposed a deal, should the enemy refuse to give in. But the Greeks were in no mood for a deal. It was set up to the Trojans to back down and restore peace. Was it worth dying for Helen? Odysseus and Menelaus headed for the home of Antenor, their host. In spite of the circumstances, they would not have forgotten to bring him gifts, perhaps including a statuette of a god, as a Greek king once set to a Hittite monarch. Antenor might have lived in one of the two-story mansions in a newly fashionable section of the lower city. When Troy was rebuilt after an earthquake around 1300 BC, the town's strict class segregation came to an end. No longer did wealthy people live just on the citadel, and the citadel was no longer just the preserve of the rich. Imagine Antenor's house, with painted plaster walls and a separate kitchen wing, with a dozen large vases sunk into the earth, to provide a kind of refrigerated storage. Inside a house like this were imported jewellery and seal stones, delicate pottery and silver bowls, and woven textiles and carved ivories. Perhaps it was even Antenor who owned a bronze figurine of a man standing in gesture of prayer, a wide-eyed, straight-nosed piece, apparently of Hittite workmanship. This figure has just been recently excavated at Troy. Although a Trojan, Antenor was a friend of the Greeks. He was an important person in Troy, an elder statesman, noble and royal adviser. He was married to Theano, daughter of Cisseus, who was priestess of Athena, which is a sign of Antenor's social prominence. Antenor always took the Greeks' side in Trojan debates, and we might have guessed that he had business interests, kinship, and marriage ties that allied him with the Greeks. As for Athena, the Trojan equivalent isn't known, but we can assume there was one, because Anatolian cities often had a protector goddess. Antenor had reason enough to speak for peace without Greek influence. He had many sons whom he had no doubt did not wish to sacrifice, who he no doubt did not wish to sacrifice in war. So when Menelaus and Odysseus spoke up in the Trojan assembly, Antenor supported them. The Greeks demanded that Helen and the stolen treasures of Sparta be returned. Then, two Greek speakers made a lasting impression on Antenor. Menelaus was more imposing. The two Greek speakers made a lasting impression on Antenor. Menelaus was more imposing physically, but the lesser speaker. Menelaus said what he had to, but he seemed to be in a hurry to get the words out. Just minutes away sat his wife, Helen, under Paris's roof. Menelaus surely knew that every man in the gathering looked at him with scorn. Every word might be taken as a sign of weakness, so no wonder the man kept his speech short. Odysseus was different. His remarks were delivered with a strategic skill that was his trademark. First, he softened up the audience by playing the hick, too intimidated by the big city to do any more than hold his scepter and look at the ground. But when his turn came, Odysseus let out words that fell on the assembly like a snowstorm. It was a verbal reminder of the man's toughness. War was Odysseus's business, as he reminded Agamemnon when the going got rough. This is what Zeus has given us, from youth to old age, to fight hard wars to the finish, until we are all dead. But the Trojans did not give Odysseus what he wanted. Indeed, things nearly got out of hand in the unruly assembly. The leading hawk was another important Trojan, Antimachus. Like Antenor, he had sons, but the prospect of their corpses on the funeral pyre did not soften his stand. There could be no surrender to the Greeks. Antimachus was a man of fiery temper, but Homer says that something else was afoot. Antimachus had been bought by Paris with especially good gifts, namely a large amount of gold, no doubt from the hoard brought back from Sparta. Not only did Antimachus argue against returning Helen or the stolen treasures, he said that the Trojans should kill Menelaus then and there. This would have been disgraceful and an outrage, as Agamemnon later put it, but it would have been a smart move. Killing Menelaus would not have only cost the Greeks a prominent, if not overly effective, leader, but it would have stripped the war of its logic. The Greeks would have found themselves fighting to return Helen to a dead man and to avenge a murdered king. In fact, two murdered kings, since killing Odysseus would have been a brilliant stroke too. In the long run, no Greek would do more harm to Troy than he did, although the Trojans could not have known that yet. In the end, the two men were given safe passage back to their camp at sea, but they returned empty-handed, without Helen or the treasure, and surely Priam approved of that. He had certainly welcomed the adulterous queen to Troy, and he treated her with warmth and chivalry, as Homer shows. While other Trojans blamed the war on Helen, Priam insisted that, as far as he was concerned, it was the gods, not she, who were responsible, and he never lifted a finger to return her to the Greeks. But he couldn't afford to. Priam did not have the luxury of waging war without considering domestic politics. No king did. Civil war lurked in Bronze Age cities, from Canaanite towns to the Hittite capital. One Canaanite mayor confessed his fear of his own peasantry. Another was driven into exile by a younger brother who despised him. In Hittite history, a whole population, or just part of it, could force a city into surrendering. Troy itself had suffered a civil war not long before the 1200s BC, forcing the exile of King Walmu, a Hittite ally. So Priam and his family had to tread carefully. Excuse me a moment, I'm just going to use the little warrior's room. It's a little early, I know, but I think I drank a little too much water. And I am back. Okay. I think it's quite interesting that, because I'm quite sure Zeus was the primary god of Troy, wasn't it? Or wasn't he? Or at least their version of Zeus, the storm god. The old storm god. So the idea that the Trojans would be okay with essentially going against the very principles of one of their gods, of generosity. Paris must have been quite cocksure in himself that he could get away with this. Returning Helen would be admitting that it had been a mistake to let her into Troy in the first place, and that admission might well bring the downfall of the House of Priam. It would have been an invitation for a coup by a member of another branch of the royal family, which was not short of pretenders, or even an outsider like Antenor. Meanwhile, Priam's supporters in the assembly could argue against appeasement, give back Helen and the treasures, and the greedy Greeks would ask for more, accept the ambassador's demands, and say goodbye to Trojan independence. Let the enemy just try to storm the city. He would stop in frustration soon enough. All that Troy needed was patriotism and patience. The argument might go. So Priam and his people would face the war and fight to win. That left the Greeks with no choice but to sharpen their spears and wage war with everything they had. Menelaus might have glowed at the thought of vengeance and the sweet odour of debt, but the shadow of Troy's massive walls would have fallen over Odysseus's thoughts, pragmatic that he was. The question of what the Greeks did next, or how they fought, is much more difficult than it might seem. There is no direct answer in the Iliad, focusing as it does on the penultimate part of the war, another early ancient epic, the Cypria, discusses the various phases of the war. But only a few lines of this poem survive, and the Cypria is less reliable than Homer. Fortunately, Homer provides clues about the earlier fighting. The first clues come from a comment by Poseidon, the god of the sea and earthquakes. Even mythological figures such as the gods speak to Homer's authenticity. Ancient peoples were deeply religious. In the Bronze Age, for example, Hittite and Egyptian accounts regularly give the gods a role in military campaigns. No Hittite scribe would think of recording a victory without thanking the gods for having marched in front of the army and thereby having granted the king success. No ambassador would swear to abide by a treaty unless an assembly of the various gods had witnessed it. In his poem about the Battle of Kadesh, 1274 BC, Pharaoh Ramses II declares that the god Ammon spoke to him and sent him forward. Even in the rationalistic heyday of classical Greece, and later, gods and heroes were commonly seen in the heat of battle. Sometimes their mere presence provided encouragement to the soldiers. At other times, divinities gave specific military advice, and sometimes they even fought. Hello, Cry. How are you? Thank you for joining us. Welcome in. At the decisive battles of Marathon, 490 BC, Salamis, 480 BC, Agaspotami, 405 BC, and Leuctra, 371 BC, for example, contemporaries thought that the gods and heroes took part. Good morning, sir. Well, it's not exactly morning for me. It's the middle of the night. But you just arrived at work. Oh, another day of work. Don't worry. I'm sure it will go nice and quick, and then we're almost there. What day is it today again? It's Thursday now technically, but we're almost at the weekend. We're halfway through. We'll be able to enjoy it once more. I hope as long as you don't work at the weekend. Thursday, yes, yeah. We're getting there. We're getting there. So just as a quick recap for you, it just talked a bit about how Menelaus, the man who had his wife stolen away by Paris, and Odysseus went as ambassadors to Troy to essentially give the Trojans a ultimatum to return them. They were put up by Antenor, who was essentially a Greek supporting Trojan, but another man, Antimachus, who may well have been paid off by Paris himself, fought against this during the kind of meeting in Troy, even suggesting that they should kill Menelaus right then and there, which would have robbed the Greeks of any sort of reason for the war itself. But they didn't do this, but they didn't give back Helen and the treasures that were stolen. And so now the Greeks are faced with the fear of, or the prospect of, taking on those Trojan Wars. How about you? How are you? I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good. I had a bit of a busy day. I did an online singing lesson, and I had to help a friend with some stuff, and I did a little bit of work on OBS. Um, I am noticing it is starting to get a little dark. I feel so. I think what I might do is quickly build us a little fire. So if you'll just give me a moment or two. Hmm. I'll talk about that in a moment. But let me just quickly. I'll just quickly do this. There we go. A nice fire for tonight. Even though I know for you, Cry, it is the morning. I might just ask, is the balance between the fire and the other nature sound okay? Fire, yeah. I put some stones around it. I hope the forest doesn't go up. I'm gonna have to run if it does. Uh, the various spirits of the other Tuatha might not be too happy with it if they found that their homes and things were destroyed. No, don't burn down. I also kind of live here, you know. As a Fianna, I live in the forests. Call the witches. No, they're dangerous. Witches are scary creatures. They'll like put a hex on you. They'll go like bibbly boggly boo, and like suddenly you'll grow like a third head. Implying you already had a second? What? I meant to say a second head. Good thing I'm just a circus clown. Oh yes. Oh wait, no, yeah. You actually. That's why I thought of it, because you actually have two heads. I was looking at your art earlier today, and it looks so cool. At least just your profile picture. It's really really cool. I was wondering why I thought third head, but clearly that must have. It definitely left an impression. It in my subconscious mind. It just didn't click. But I was doing a little. Whoop! My internet went burr for a bit. Oh, okay. Hopefully everything's good. But yeah. I think your art left a subconscious imprint in my mind. The the clown girl with two heads. It's very cool. Very very cool. But yeah, I spent a little bit of time earlier. Just setting this up. I wanted to have kind of two potential kind of scenes, and I felt like the fire with the birds in the background and the nature sounds might be a nice kind of ASMR feel. I think that the fire shouldn't be too loud. I put a, even when it cracks. I love nature's. Yeah, they're so nice. The sound of a crackling fire or like birds chirping. It's always so lovely. Although I often like the more typical ASMR sounds, but sometimes just throwing on like ambient sounds, 10 hours plus ASMR channel is a nice way to just relax. Oftentimes I use it as background music for, well, I guess a background for my own reading, just to put me in that thought. Or I go out to the local kind of like forest area, and I just kind of sit down and read. Hello, Abo Sama. Thank you so much for joining. Hello, hello. Welcome in. Welcome in. I was just just talking a little bit about ASMR and nature sounds and how they're so relaxing. How are you, Abo? How are you? But yes, Cry, I was doing a little bit of singing earlier. Uh, just working on my like higher range, which isn't particularly high, but just trying to push it up just a little bit to where I'm a little bit uncomfortable, and then pushing it a little bit further. I'm all right. How about you? Hope your day has been going well. It's been going good. I started a new book, went to the gym, helped my friend, did a little bit of singing lessons. Also, it's nice that I could catch the stream. Yeah, it's really nice to see you. Welcome in, welcome in. Oh, wait, I remember hearing you sing during the... Yes, I did Bad Bad Leroy Brown. Although I kind of just winged it, a cappella style. Because, I don't know. I think I was worried about singing too loudly and waking everyone up, because that was in like the middle of the night. But yeah, welcome in, welcome in. Is that Abo? Is that how you Abo Samo? Because that's how I'm reading it. I want to make sure I'm not mispronouncing it. But it's online singing class. That's cool, but is it a bit difficult? It is a little bit. That's why I usually Abo excellent. I usually go in person, but I couldn't make it this week, so we did an online class instead when she had some free time. Thankfully, my mic is pretty decent. I will say what I do find difficult is trying to. So say if you're doing like scales or something, and you're just going, like jumping up like five, whatever the terms are called. I don't know music theory. I find it's almost more difficult when doing things listening through your headphones to try to match the sound, because it's like it's a little bit difficult to know am I on where I should be. But she sent me on some practice things as well to work on, some stuff to do with kind of both breathing, because breathing is so important, being able to control it and have it be nice and smooth and always supporting your voice, and also some like resonance sounds. So like literally I'm going to be going but like constantly going up, like it's going to be going up and then down, so working through my range. And it's all about keeping the sound to the front of the mouth, because I guess that's where the most resonance would come from, or at least for certain things. I know for when you're doing like a deep singing, it's more in the chest, is where you'll hear kind of that resonance. And I think I've heard that if you're doing kind of like deep singing, it's meant to be kind of at the back of the mouth, or kind of back of the throat. So rather than trying to you can yodel. No, I cannot yodel. Well, maybe if I sing high enough, my voice breaking will be considered yodeling. My horrible pitch will be could be considered such, but no, I cannot yodel. My voice, I have sort of the typical male voice of a baritone. Although my teacher says that I'm a little bit lower than a typical baritone, getting into bass area, but call them cows. Call who cows? Oh yeah, because people would yodel to call cows over. It would be cool. It'd kind of be cool. I'll have to listen to some. I might practice yodeling tomorrow or something. Just look up some videos and see if I can do it. But I'm not so deep that I can do like what's a song now? Old man river, that old man river. I can't get down deep enough for like a real bass, and I'm not singing quite powerfully as well, so it's a little bit higher than it would normally be. Because I do think I can get lower than that if I could sing loudly, but I would wake people if I suddenly started belting into song. There's a song that I like called "She Taught Me to Yodel" by Frank Ifield. I'll have to check that out. I'll have to. I will. Hang on. Let me. She called me. She taught me to yodel by Frank Ifield. I will save that in a blank page, and I will listen to that after stream. But yeah, it's quite. I enjoy it, even though I might not be some amazing singer. It's definitely a lot of fun. Um, and I'm definitely more comfortable in like Frank Sinatra and kind of that type of singing. Um, Tom Waits is another great singer, and I love his song Martha. So I'd love to do that type of songs, those type of songs maybe, if I was to do a singing stream. I love the Wiggles; they're so cute. But yeah, I said I'm quite happy with how this looks. What about Elvis Presley? Oh, what's No, not Who Let the Dogs Out. I'm thinking of oh, how does it start again? Uh, the warden threw a party in the county jail. The prison band was there, they began to wail. The band was jumping and the joint began to swing. You should have heard those knocked out jailbirds sing, let's rock. Everybody, let's rock. Everybody in the wholesale block was dancing to the jailhouse rock. um. Oh wait, no, that's No, yeah, that is Elvis. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know why I was thinking of Who Let the Dogs Out. But yeah, that's a great song. I hope I don't get fucking copyright striked. Elvis coming back from the grave to bitch slap me with his like 250 pounds of blubber that he had later in life. Just sends me into the spirit world. I get copyright striked by a ghost. But I think copyright is a little bit more than just singing a couple of lyrics. I think it's like, there's music and other stuff. Singing stream, yeah, I know. This is meant to be ASMR. What am I doing? I'm meant to be reading. He charges at you with his hair. I'm just oh no, you know what I'm imagining? You guys might have. I don't even know what the origin is, but there's a meme where like there's two characters. One's on the ground begging, and the other has a guitar and he's about to hit him. So that's how I'm imagining that going. That would be an honor to get like whacked over the head by the king of the king. But yeah, I'd love to do a singing stream. I think it could be a ton of fun. Although it would be so nerve wracking. But for king and country as the oh wait, that could be, oh my god, I just thought of so much fun, such a fun stream idea, and I'm gonna have to suggest this to some people. But there's a game called Mountain Blade Warband. It's one of my favorite games of all time, and there's also a Napoleonic warfare mod for it. And I think one of my favorite ways to play that is doing commander battles, and doing commander battles where you control a bunch of AI units and you can tell them to line up and fire and do stuff. And I think it would be so fun if you, like, even just playing that itself could be a lot of fun, because it would be nice and easy to be able to talk to people and talk about my thought process for like strategy and stuff for how to take a hill against the enemy or something. Or if I get like knocked out by some artillery. But it could also be so much fun if you did like a big match of a bunch of different VTubers. You could almost do like VTuber versus VTuber. You could have like, I don't know. Oh, I like those. Yeah, they're so much fun. I played a bit of Bannerlord, but it's I've just been busy, and for me, Viking Conquest is the best version of Mountain Blade, especially with the fan made mod. But yeah, I think that could be such a fun kind of collab idea when I decide to branch out to that, because I'd love to interact with some more streamers. Although I will say, one of the things that Like, I think what I'd do is I wouldn't just like jump in and be like, hey, let's stream together. It would be like, hey, I'd be up for doing a collab with you. Let's set aside some time and have a talk, have like a little chat together, and see, kind of just get to know each other first and get comfortable with talking before like just trying to do that straight away. Because sometimes I see things on Twitter where it's like, Rua, if you don't mind me asking, are you Irish? Yes, I am. I am. I that I am. The shirt that I'm wearing, the tunic, sorry, I should say, is specifically an Irish tunic known as a Lena. Now, some of that, it's hard obviously to distinguish between certain things, especially if you don't. I knew I heard an accent. I suppose I'm trying to keep things nice and clear. But I mean, I could start talking fairly naturally. Although, I don't know if it might be a little bit quick for some people who aren't too used to English, or Hiberno English as it's known. I love Irish people. Well, thank you. We do seem to have a good opinion of us across the world, and it definitely helps. It's like anywhere you go, you open your mouth and people are suddenly like, oh my god, you need to come drinking with us or something. And it's a great way to just get to know people. Ooh, that's why the accent. I know I might be suppressing it a little, because I tried to learn the Irish and Scottish accent last year. I failed. Yeah, there's so many different accents, because the American accent, where it's like, hidey tidy tie, oh, I left my shillelagh in the bar. That's not an Irish accent. I don't think there's anywhere in Ireland that talks like that. You have accents all over Ireland. Obviously you have the Northern Ireland accent. I'm not very good at accents, so I won't even attempt some of them. Although one of my favourites is the North Dublin accent, where it's sort of like how do I even explain it? It's even difficult to do, because it's just such an iconic accent of the area. But yeah, is that like the Viking accent? I wouldn't know what the Viking accent is. Dublin was a Viking area. I have relatives who now live in Ireland, so when I talk to them, they have the accent now too. Yeah, you can, and that's are they Irish relatives, or are they like they just moved to live in Ireland? But yeah, I think you'd very quickly. It's very funny talking to like people who moved here from Poland. They moved from like Poland and stuff, and you'll hear in like a weird mix of like Polish and Irish accent, and they're saying certain words like "buy" or "crack," or "fiend," and it's all quite entertaining, I must say, to hear those strange mixes. But yeah, Dublin was a Viking town. There was a settlement there before, but it became quite prominent after the Vikings arrived. So there is a Viking inheritance there, but I don't know if it would have been like a specifically Viking accent. They could have left some mark, but eventually Dublin was taken over, and I mean essentially after Brian Boru effectively crushed the rebelling Leinstermen and the Vikings. From then on, the Irish pretty much always established supremacy over the Vikings. At that point, they were never able to really retake any sort of independence, and pretty much any individual who held dominion over the Viking towns were pretty much the more powerful groups on the island, because they were some of the most richest areas. Yeah, languages and accents are fascinating. I love them. I've watched some videos. I watched actually a really great video of a guy. He sort of critiqued a lot of the people who say how to do an Irish accent in 5 minutes, and he showed like really going through the process of learning the accent, and it was the Dublin accent as well. I might actually, because I thought it was such a fantastic accent. I could tell that it was at times a little off, but if you want to watch a really good video on it, oh, let me just really good video about learning how to do an Irish accent. This is the video to watch, I think. Let me just make sure that this is the right one. I just have to sit through an ad. But I wonder, do I sound particularly Irish, or am I sort of, I might be hiding the accent a little bit. I suppose I learned how, well, I did debating when I was younger, so, you know, you learn to, hello, Haru, hello, Haru, wait, no, Haru, welcome in. Rua, I'm just gonna grab coffee. No worries, no worries. Yeah, this is the one. So that's a really, really cool video. Oni-san, Oni-san. Oh, that's very, very cute, very cute. But that's a really good video, Abo, to learn about how to do an Irish accent. I should have an accent, but I don't. I sound like a normal American guy going to work. For us, the Americans kind of talk like this. This is kind of how a lot of you guys sound to us. Well, this is more of, I feel like this is more like a, I'm not going to say Texan, but kind of like a South. I'm Arabic, by the way. Oh. Yeah, I know a lot of people who go over there and they just, the American accents can really take over. But I know there's so many different, like there's like the Valley Girl accent, where they always kind of end words, they always end sentences going up, and it's fucking grating on the ears. And they say things like a lot, which we do as well. Please, my teacher sounds like that. Oh no, it's so painful. I'm sorry. Your accents are very fun to tease, as I'm sure ours is. But that one in particular can just be so grating. But it is funny, you know, the stereotype of them saying things like is very common, but we in many parts of Ireland we also say like a ton. I just realized I kind of paused in the middle of that chapter, so I might I'll talk for another minute or two, and then we will go back to the book. But welcome in, Haru. How are you? How are you? How ru you? I've peaked. That's the best joke I'm ever gonna tell on on a stream ever. It's over. I should end my career now. End on that high note. I'm Gucci, yar. Nice. I almost I hear like Sasa and like everyone else in that group say things like yar or nar, and I'm just like, I wonder, am I gonna start doing it and I'm gonna get made fun of by my friends? But that's good to hear that you're doing well. Yeah, you're like pirates. But good to hear you're well. Good to hear you're well. A question, if you don't mind. Sure, shoot. Go right ahead, Ebo-sama. I don't mind at all. As long as it's not too, like, you know, if it's like, hey, what's your opinion on the Easter Rising? It's like, let's just relax a little. That was my question. Where pirates originated from? A question if you... Oh no, don't worry. Yeah, no worries. Where pirates originated from? Well, I don't know, but if it's like the accent, like the stereotypical "yar me mateys," I imagine that it's a weird kind of combination of like Irish and Scottish and Welsh. So basically, it was people from all over that area. Like the Britain and Ireland, as well as some other areas like the Caribbean and stuff, and Africa, all living together on ships. And I mean that's what I'm assuming. I actually have no idea, but I feel like that is where pirate. I would assume. Of course. I mean, pirates are specific to like the like colonial, well, not colonial, but like that kind of period of history where you sail the seven seas. But I mean, Vikings were pirates. The Greeks at this time period were were essentially pirates. But the stereotypical pirate. I think it's like amalgamation of all the various accents that would have just been on board those ships. Europe, Europe. But yeah, at least that's my idea. But I've never read into pirates, to be honest. I just know that there are, the stereotypical accent often has, like, for example, we say ye, so like yar me, like ye. I feel like ye is a very piratey sounding word. Ye scurvy dogs, but we say ye. Hydrate, my guy. Oh, is my voice sounding a little parched? Thank you, Haru. But yeah, okay. I think that was a nice segue. For a while, I love that area time when you and a bunch of people sailing on an adventure without knowing what is waiting for you. Yeah, that must have been. I mean, those adventurers and stuff, and those who would do such things like Tom Green and Ernest Shackleton, who were heading for the South Pole so many times. Those types of adventurers, which is obviously a different time period, but is similar ideas, is like that urge. What would it be called? Faustian, I think, to explore everything and reach the highest peaks and the lowest valleys and stuff is it's quite something. I'm not sure if I would have been. Well, I've only been on a few boats, like proper boats, not like barges and stuff going, or like big ships that don't rock too much. But I definitely didn't like it. It made me sick. I get motion sickness sometimes, and being on a boat did not help. But I'm going to return to the text for now because I think it's been a bit long. The first clue comes from oh, what is this? Oh yes, this is what the Greeks did after they landed. Now you can see anything everywhere in the world without moving a leg. Although I do think that there's a significant difference between seeing something on a computer and going there in real life. It definitely hits different, especially art. Oh my god, when you see art in real life, rather than just on some photo, even if it's like insane quality, it's a different experience altogether. Oh yes. On the treacherous plain of Troy, the only rock of certainty was the gods. Men needed to believe that the deities cared about their fate, because the alternative was the loneliness of death. So when Homer sets verse after verse in Olympus, he is not offering mere window dressing. He is opening a window into the soul of the ancient Greek soldier. And when Homer quotes a god, he may be reporting what men claimed to have heard at the time. By the way, if I stop chatting or something, it's just the net got cut off for the next 3 hours. No worries, no worries. Thank you for showing up, Abo-sama. It's very much appreciated. I don't mind if you have to head off, or if you just want to head off and do something else. I've no bother. It's very much appreciated, just showing up and chatting for a little bit. But if you want to lurk, that's just as good as well. And even if you don't want to lurk and you don't want to head off, that's fine. I have no bother. But I hope you enjoy the reading. By the 9th year of the war, in an attempt to buck up the Greeks when the battle was going badly, Poseidon cast scorn on the enemy. The 9th year, that is, in Homer's reckoning. We've already seen that the real war was much shorter. How can the Greeks let the Trojans push them back on their ships? He asks, when the Trojans usually behave like frightened deer. The Trojans have been running through the woods as if afraid of the wolves, defenseless creatures without a heart for battle. They were never willing to stand their ground against the armed might of the Greeks. Achilles makes a similar claim. He says that up to now Hector had never wanted to fight far from the walls, and he would advance no further than the oak tree near Troy's main or Scaean gate. There he would have the help of soldiers stationed in the towers at either side of the gate. Even so, the Greek adds, Hector once barely escaped Achilles' charge, and Hera goes one better. She claims that when it came to the Dardanian gate, Hector wouldn't dare so much as go outside the walls, presumably because this postern gate lacked protective bastions. This is exaggeration. You can you continue reading and I'll be listening to you. You don't have to read or answer. Oh, whoops. I'm back listening in while doing layouts. Nice. Enjoy working and making some money. Abo-sama, meet Cry. Cry, meet Abo-sama. Cry is a two-headed clown girl. Very cool. This is exaggeration, but the Trojans did indeed spend most of the war on defense, leaving attacks to the Greeks. Perhaps some of the Trojans were cowards, as Poseidon says, but most were sound strategists. Like their brethren elsewhere in the ancient Near East, they knew that coming out and fighting made better rhetoric than strategy. The Trojans had only limited choices. Tactically, they could have nibbled away at the Greeks with guerrilla raids, and we can fault the Trojans for doing so little of that. But the Trojans were absolutely right to avoid a frontal assault of the Greek camp. The Trojans depended on allies, and so they had to avoid casualties. High losses would make those allies give up and go home. By staying on the strategic defensive, the Trojans bowed to the realities of warfare at the time. The late Bronze Age knew 3 ways to conquer a fortified city: assault, siege, or ruse. Assault meant either scaling the city wall with ladders, breaking through the walls, or through a gate with battering rams and or hammers and axes, or tunneling below the walls. Siege meant encircling the city walls, preventing supplies from entering and starving the defenders into surrender. Ruse meant any trick or tricks, sometimes coordinated with traitors inside the walls, that could gain control of the city. Each of these tactics was difficult and dangerous. To penetrate the walls at Troy meant you first had to reach them, and that meant either winning a pitched battle against the army that protected Troy, or pulling off a surprise attack. During years of intermittent fighting on the plain of Troy, the Greeks reached the wall a few times, but the Trojans always quickly forced them back. The Trojans had taken to heart the Mesopotamian proverb that strong gates alone can't save a city, without a strong army to defend them. Chariots were Troy's secret weapon, and, as Odysseus knew, when men mount swift-footed horses, they could decide the outcome of an equally matched war, and decide it in a flash. No wonder, then, when he said goodbye to his wife Penelope on that day he left for war, Odysseus told her that he expected many Greeks never to come home. They had no supply lines from home to sustain them. Instead, large number of Greek soldiers had to sail off on food hunting raids or settle down as farmers on the Gallipoli Peninsula on the other side of the Dardanelles. Thucydides is the source of this insight, and the sober historian may be right, because later Greek armies did the same sort of thing when necessary. With the Greeks unable to gather all their men for one big push, the Trojan War could only be bloody and frustrating. No wonder that Odysseus characterized it afterwards as a hateful path decreed by thundering Zeus to lead many men to death. It is common to speak of the siege of Troy, but in fact there was no siege. the Greeks never encircled the city. They built no palisades, no ditches to cut off Troy from access to the outside world by land, because they couldn't. They lacked the superiority in numbers to establish a ring around the city without risking an overwhelming Trojan counterattack. The Trojan defenders were, as Odysseus says in another context, as many as the leaves and flowers that come in spring. On 3 occasions before the last phase of the war, the Greeks reached the city wall and nearly took control of them. At a place near the landmark of a particular wild fig tree near the western gate. If Bronze Age armies had a field manual, it would have called for the use of a stratagem to reach the enemy walls, such as a surprise attack at night, or a decoy to lure his army away and leave the walls unprotected. The early Hittite rulers, Pithana and his son Anitta, around 700s BC, each stormed an enemy city by night. We don't know whether the Greeks used such tactics or took the more direct route of winning a pitched battle and pushing on to Troy. In any case, their probes had found a weak spot in the fortifications, perhaps that point in the northwestern wall where a former gate had been filled in with rubble, a pile that was now sagging. It was there, under the leadership of the 2 men named Ajax, Ajax son of Telamon and Oleon, or Lesser Ajax, that Idomeneus, Diomedes, Agamemnon, and Menelaus, the best Greek soldiers, nearly sealed Troy's fate. The source of this information is not a soldier but a woman, Hector's wife, Andromache. She stood with her husband near the Scaean gate of the Trojan wall, and the tough-minded lady gave him military advice. If that seems like Josephine telling Napoleon how to invade Russia, it adds to the evidence of the relative freedom of Trojan women. One ancient Greek literary critic even wanted to delete these lines as not really Homer because he couldn't believe that Andromache would lecture her husband on strategy. But Andromache wasn't Greek. She says, "That quarter most the skilful Greeks annoy, where you wild fig trees join the wall of Troy. Thou from this tower defend the important post, there Agamemnon points his dreadful host, that pass Diomedes, Ajax strive to gain, and there the vengeful Spartan fires his train. Thrice our bold foes the fierce attack have given, or led by hopes, or dictated by heaven. Let others in the field their arms employ, but stay my Hector here, and guard his Troy." A woman like Andromache had perhaps the most to lose in a sack of the city, because she would end up a slave and a mistress to one of the victors. We can't help but wonder if her statement of 3 near breakthroughs isn't another case of heroic exaggeration. But even one attempt to break the walls would have been frightening enough for the Trojans. Although the Greeks had much experience storming cities, their forte was attack from the sea. We have to wonder whether they were equal to those experts in land assaults, the Assyrians, Egyptians, and Hittites. Scaling a city wall was an elite operation, and Andromache is specific about which Greek champions led the assault. Agamemnon and Menelaus, brothers, kings, and son of Atreus, have already been introduced. If not the Greeks' greatest warriors, they were nonetheless strong soldiers and key political leaders. Their presence in an attempt to scale Troy's walls is no surprise. The 4 other attackers, Andromache also mentions Idomeneus and Lesser Ajax as part of the assault, all famous soldiers, represent respectively the Greeks' best hand-to-hand fighters, their most vicious best hand-to-hand fighter, their most vicious cutthroat, a veteran of their most recent successful assault on the city of the day, and an older man who was as experienced as he was expendable. Surely it also mattered that the latter 2 had brought the biggest contingents to Troy after Agamemnon and the elderly Nestor. Odysseus, that all-around soldier and well-known sacker of cities, is not recorded in having taken part in the assault on the walls, but the Trojans had a hard time picking Odysseus out in a crowd because he was shorter than some of the other Greek heroes, so perhaps Andromache missed him. Here are the other leaders of the assault team. Idomeneus was son of Deucalion and king of Crete, the island that, 2 centuries earlier, had been among the Greeks' first conquests. He was a tough warrior who carried a huge figure-of-8 shield into battle, made of leather rimmed with bronze and held together by 2 rods. Although no longer in the flower of youth, he still loved to fight, and was known as a great spearman. Along the wall of his hut stood a barbaric display of spears, shields, and helmets and breastplates, stripped from Trojans whom he had killed. It was a modest version of the more than 1,000 pieces of arms and armour, including 2 gilded chariots, that Pharaoh Thutmose III took when he conquered Megiddo in 1479 BC. Figure-of-8 shields such as Idomeneus once seemed anachronistic, since they were thought to have gone out of use around 1500 BC, but not long ago a painted pottery fragment turned up that shows these shields still in use in the 1300s, so that may well have been a feature on the battlefield at the time of the Trojan War. Ajax, son of Telamon of Salamis, was no genius, but he was a murderous giant who never passed up a fight. He and Achilles were cousins. Among the Greeks, only Achilles was bigger and stronger than Ajax, and Idomeneus reckoned Ajax could defeat Achilles in a hand-to-hand fight, though he could never match Achilles' speed. Ajax would fight Hector, Troy's greatest warrior, to a standstill. Ajax was more like a wall than a man, which is why they called him the bulwark of the Greeks. He went into battle wearing a full body suit of armor and carrying a huge, tower-shaped shield made of 7 layers of leather and rimmed with bronze. While most tower shields depicted in Mycenaean art are covered with oxhide, some appear to be metallic, so Homer's description might well be accurate. Ajax's normal weapon was a spear, but he was strong enough to lift a big piece of marble, swing it above his head, and then bring it down on a Trojan with enough force to smash the man's helmet and crush his skull. He sounds like a hunk. Ajax, son of Oileus. Actually, I should say, most recently, if you would like to read about that battle between Ajax and Hector, where, in all honesty, Hector is essentially defeated by Ajax, Hector only being saved because the priests of the gods step in between them, on both sides, one from the Greeks and one from the Trojans, and declare that the gods have decided that the duel is over. If you would like to listen to that duel, Son Albionus did a great reading, his most recent stream, of, I believe it's book 7. If you check out his stream, that's SUNALBION. Wait, no, am I spelling that right? If I type it out, it should be Albionus. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's... Albionus. Where is he? Why can't I see him? Anyway, I can't seem to find him in my things, but I would definitely recommend checking out his stream. Ooh, I know where I can find him. There we go. Where is it? Okay. Ah, come on. There we go. Do check him out. He's a very, very nice guy. I tried to shout someone out last stream, but it didn't work. So I'm gonna have to figure that out. Maybe I have something, maybe some setting I have to do. Um, Apologies for the momentary break. Ajax, son of Oileus of Locris, suffered in comparison to the prowess of the comrade whose name he shared, so he was called the Lesser Ajax. But he was in no way deficient when it came to mayhem. He was a foul-mouthed brawler with a short temper, and ready fists. He is remembered in the epic cycle for dragging Cassandra from the altar of Athena to oar her. Who better than such a brute to lead the first wave over the wall? Diomedes, son of Tydeus, was king of Argos. Like Odysseus, with whom he teamed up from time to time, Diomedes was a warrior for all seasons, and although he was the youngest of the Greek champions in the Iliad, Diomedes excelled in pitched battle. Homer details the murderous spree in which Diomedes killed the great Trojan bowman Pandarus, son of Lycon. Nearly did the same to Aeneas, and even wounded the gods Ares and Aphrodite. Surely a way of saying that he was reckless on the battlefield. Warriors had been wounding goddesses at least since Gilgamesh, a Mesopotamian epic with roots in the 2000s BC. Diomedes was a favorite. Actually, I just want to say, it's probably going to say this here. Diomedes was a favorite of Athena, just as Hattusilish III was a favorite of the goddess Ishtar, whom an Assyrian inscription refers to as the mistress of strife and battle. In the Hittite king's case, Ishtar was everywhere in battle, now marching in front of Hattusilish, now holding his hand. Diomedes likewise might have felt as if Athena's goatskin itself wrapped around his shoulders as he fought. I wanted to say that it's so funny reading these things, because it's or listening to the reading, because oftentimes it's like the gods appear in battle, and if they get hurt, especially Ares, who's like this big bad god of war, of mayhem and chaos, he runs back to Daddy Zeus and starts like crying, like, look what those mean mortals did. Rua, I gotta go. I need a mod at a stream. That's okay, Cry. Have a lovely day, and I hope you have a nice peaceful time. Daddy Zeus, yes. He's daddy to too much if you trust the stories. Have a lovely day too. Thank you, Cry. I hope you have a nice, easy modding time. Bye bye. But yes, Daddy Zeus, he's a little too free willing, so to speak. More like Free Willy. Diomedes wore a full suit of bronze. Armor, and his helmet was probably bronze with a horsehair plume. His shield was another, of the figure-8 style. A combat veteran, he had taken part in the expedition that finally destroyed the city of Thebes. His father, Tydeus, had died trying in an earlier attempt. But he had not died gloriously, as a story in the epic tradition reports. Tydeus killed a Theban warrior, Melanippus, but not without receiving a fatal wound himself. While he lay dying, Tydeus reached over and helped himself to some of Melanippus's brain tissue, which he then ate. The gods approved of warriors who crowd in victory, but they drew the line at cannibalism. Myth says that Athena punished Tydeus by withdrawing a promise of immortality. To storm a walled city, it was necessary to use soldiers armed with protective shields, and archers to provide covering fire to the attackers. Slingers were also useful. By the late Bronze Age, the art of war had advanced considerably. Battering rams and siege towers were now common in the ancient Near East. A battering ram was, at its simplest, a long beam tipped with metal. A siege tower all allowed the attacker's bowmen to shoot at the defenders on the battlements, thereby protecting the men operating the battering ram below. Another refinement was to put wheels on the scaling ladders, as the Egyptians did. Attackers sometimes built a dirt ramp up to the wall, and it was not unknown to try to tunnel beneath the walls and enter the city from below. And often tunneling underneath the walls would be used to also attempt to collapse them. Military architects always tried to keep one step ahead of the latest advance in storming technology, and Troy's walls were up to date. The city had two sets of walls, an outer perimeter protecting the lower town and an inner citadel to which the defenders could retreat. At nearly a mile in circumference, the outer wall was more difficult to defend than the compact circuit of the citadel. The outer wall consisted of a stone foundation, on top of which sun-dried mud bricks, better known in North America as adobe. The bricks, made of a mixture of mud, sand, straw, and manure, were cheap and easy to manufacture. Adobe cushions the shock of a battering ram, but unfortunately it is vulnerable to enemy sappers, who can cut right through it. The higher the stone foundation, therefore, the better. In the Iliad, the Greeks built a rampart of wood and stone to protect their camp. They surrounded it with a deep trench, in which they placed stakes. Troy's outer wall was similarly surrounded by a wooden palisade and a trench cut into the bedrock. Excuse me. Had a nice sip of water. Where was I? Troy's outer wall was similarly surrounded by a wooden palisade and a trench cut into the bedrock to 8 feet deep and 10 to 11 feet wide. At intervals, the trench was interrupted for access to the gates. The Greeks' trench was built to stop chariots, and no doubt the Trojan trench was too, but it would have stopped siege engines and made it difficult to use battering rams anywhere except at the gates. The trench protected the outer wall before the 1300. The trench protected the outer wall before about 1300, but by the 1200s it had been filled with dirt, potsherds, and animal bones. They would have made no military sense except in the unlikely event that the sherds and bones were sharp enough to serve as caltrops, i.e. cavalry obstacles. Perhaps the trench was filled in for public health reasons, since rainwater in it might have represented breeding grounds for mosquitoes, leading in turn to outbreaks of malaria. The Trojans would not have known the cause of the illness, but they might have noticed a correlation between the outbreak and the trench. But the likeliest explanation is that the lower town had prospered and grown. A second trench has been discovered, about 300 feet southeast of the first. It could have replaced the first trench, as a defensive barrier. In any case, the Trojans would not have wanted to concede the lower city without a fight, especially not after the movement of wealthy citizens there in the 1200 BC. The area could survive attack because of its own fresh water from a well located in the massive northeast bastion. Sling stones and metal weapons have been found in the destruction debris around 1200 BC of Troy 6I. All of this may well be evidence of a failed defense. After breaching the outer wall, the enemy would have to battle through the lower city and its maze of narrow streets. Then would come a bigger challenge: Fortress Troy. The citadel of Troy, called Pergamos, rose about 100 feet above the plain, a half-acre stronghold. The defenders could stockpile food, and they could also rely on a supply of fresh water from an underground spring, reached via a network of man-made tunnels dug some 500 feet into the rock. Pergamos was protected by one of the finest fortifications in the world, a 1,150-foot circuit of walls standing about 33 feet high and more than 16 feet thick. The bottom of the wall was made of stone and stood about 20 feet high, with an adobe superstructure about another 13 feet high. A walkway for the defenders crowned the wall, protected by a breastwork. The stone base of the wall sloped outward, thereby denying attackers a blind spot out to reach a defender's arrow, out of reach of a defender's arrow. The gates were state of the art. The south gate, probably the main entrance to the city, stood beside an enormous tower built in the 1200s BC. At the height of more than 30 feet, the tower was a defender's dream. The east gate had an entrance passage that channeled attackers into the narrow courtyard between two walls, and then made them take a sharp corner before reaching the gate itself. I may actually check, because I believe if we check... I will just pull this up while I'm reading, because we are having some mentions. Whoa, that's big. We are having some mentions of parts of Troy. So hopefully this paper doesn't light up from the... I don't want to block you guys. But we can see here the citadel in the northern part of Troy and the lower town. If we... the line of the ditch based on magnetic prospection, the Scian Gate, the Dandarian Gate, so many different things. So this is a nice way to kind of see where Troy was situated by the bay and by the Dardanelles, and the overall shape of it, according to archaeology. The east gate had an entrance passage that... Oh, I had read that. In the 1200s, the defensive tower and a sort of foregate were added. The imposing northeast bastion took advantage of a natural cliff. It stood about 40 feet high and was about 60 feet wide. Probably the bastion flanked a gate in the lower town's wall, just as a tower flanked the south gate in the citadel wall. Only a punishing and blood-spattered fight could have brought the Greeks over the top of Troy. Imagine, for example, Diomedes in the thick of battle, an angry lion leading his crack troops in a charge to the ramparts. The attack on the wall would have been also an attack on the senses, a combination of sights and sounds to terrify defender and attacker alike. We might imagine the twanging of bowstrings, the hum of javelins in motion, the swish of slings, the bang of missiles hitting shields that protected soldiers' backs as they climbed the scaling ladders, the crash of falling ladders, the thud of the battering ram against the doors of the gate, the grunts of the defender as they tried to absorb the blow and hold the gates in place, the moans of the wounded, the crack of the whip on horseflesh and the whinnying of the frightened beasts, the blare of the trumpet ringing out the call to one last charge, and the snapping of the city's standard as it blew in the wind above the walls. Then, too, there were surely other sounds that were no less terrifying for their low volume. The pop of a breaking shield strap, the gurgling of a dying man, and imagine, through it all, Diomedes' battle cry, a bellow that came from some place deep in his heart. As the Greeks reached for glory and the Trojans made a stand for their homes and family, the cruel war-gored Ares would have had his fill of victims. A lone Greek warrior might make it up to the battlements, hauling himself up the rungs of the ladder, hand over blistered hand, and then spear a Trojan defender before being stabbed to death himself. Wounded men would tumble down the ramparts and the scaling ladders. Corpses would lie in heaps of blood, some with their hands cut off, some decapitated, some with their bellies ripped open. Flies would buzz around them in the hot sun and cluster in their mouths and ears. And yet the Greeks did not manage to storm the city of Troy. Troy stood firm. And that's the end of Chapter 4, Attacking the Walls. Quite a gruesome ending. I apologize to anyone who was happily listening along and was suddenly thrown into this thick attack on the walls where we read about what would have been horrifying for those men. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was a nice short chapter. Let me just check how long the next chapter is. 85, because it's already getting a little late. Oh, it's not that long at all actually. It's only 15 pages. The last chapter was about 25, so I could definitely continue on, but I hope you guys are enjoying this. I'm just going to take a small break just to take a sip of water. Okay, so yeah, I think I will. I think I'll keep going because I don't think it will take too long to get through that. Oh, is my POC? Yeah, my PC's okay. It kind of just got a little bit loud for a couple of moments. So, Chapter 5: The Dirty War. It is probably a sunny day, but then it usually is a sunny day in the Gulf of Edermit. Imagine the sky and sea as a cascade of light blue wildflowers, crocuses, wild chicory, and bellflowers. The meadow is an ocean of gates, punctuated by islands of juniper shrubs and an elm tree for shade. Here in the shadow of the woody Mount Placos, the only sound are the herdsman's pipe and the occasional bleating of the glossy white sheep. Might just take down this. There we go. There are 7 herdsmen, all sons of King Etion of Thebes under Placos, a city at the head of the Gulf. They were half-brothers, whose mothers were Etion's wives. They are not quite slumming, they are princes tending the animals, since the herds are the wealth of the kingdom, but they are blessedly free of the court and its cares. We might imagine that they have nothing on their minds except horseplay, wine, and how to find willing servant girls, when suddenly an enraged boar comes running out of the woods. That is, it seems like a boar, but it is in fact a man. Brilliant, swift-footed Achilles, the equal of the war god Ares, is covered with bronze and carrying a shield and a giant spear of ash tipped with bronze. He is massive, too, and he is coming at the boys at what seems like an impossible rate of speed. He screams something in Greek. The words are foreign, but the tone is hair-raising, and throws his javelin into the nearest herdsman's neck. And then he pulls out his sword and starts slashing. It is all over before they can take cover, or beg, or offer ransom, or fight back. 7 unarmed princes, 7 corpses, and 1 giant, sweating and panting, and smeared with his victim's blood. And he is richer by a very fine herd of cattle and sheep. Or so Homer tells the tale. The real Achilles was no doubt accompanied on the raid by a platoon of his men, the Myrmidons, his faithful comrades who loved war and fought ferociously. We would also expect to find Achilles' right-hand man at his side, Patroclus, son of Menoetius. Patroclus played a role in the Myrmidons, akin to that in the Egyptian army of the top general, Horemheb, who was sole companion. He who is by the feet of the Lord on the battlefield on the day of killing Asiatics. That was in quotes, by the way. I didn't just add in Asiatics. Or the author didn't just add that in. Just the way it was phrased in the text, I suppose. Or in the source. In other words, Patroclus was Achilles' chief deputy, and no mean commander in his own right. He was murderous on the battlefield, but gentle off it, having learned a thing or two since boyhood when he killed a playmate in a fit of rage during a late game of dice. Later Greek writers made Achilles and Patroclus lovers, and perhaps they were, but Homer doesn't say so. Achilles is the main character of Homer's Iliad. The writer focuses our attention on the alternatively brooding and bloodthirsty character of the supposed ninth year of the war. But he also offers glimpses of earlier days when Achilles was less emotional, more pragmatic, and more effective. Homer says nothing about the notorious heel. He does not mention the tale that Achilles' mother, Thetis, dipped her infant son in the river Styx and made nearly all his body invulnerable, except the heel that she held him by. Those details are probably later additions to the story. Homer's Achilles receives a lot of help from the gods, but he is mortal. Like Greece's other great generals, Achilles had an instinct for asymmetry. The Greeks fought war in two dimensions, land and sea, which encouraged them to think creatively. The Trojans acted as if the aim of their policy should be to destroy the enemy's military power. The Greeks' goal was to destroy all sources of support for the hostile state, including its economy and even its prestige, and Achilles was the hammer of destruction. Achilles came from Phthia, a region in central Greece at the raw edge of Bronze Age Greek civilization. He embodied the best and the worst of the era, its talent and its violence. In all the Greek army, no one could match Achilles for his looks or physique. He was tall and striking. His handsome face was crowned with a mane of long, dirty blonde hair. Modesty was not a heroic virtue, and Achilles would have agreed. He calls himself big and beautiful, and furthermore, he says, "None of the bronze-wearing Greeks is my equal in war, although some are better than me in the assembly." Achilles was temperamental, but when he was in the mood, he couldn't get enough of battle. Combat was his road to what every hero wanted: fame, glory, and honor. In what Homer calls the 90 year of the wall, Achilles claimed to have destroyed no fewer than 23 cities, which comes to about 2.5 attacks annually. If 23 is an exaggeration, it is not out of line with Bronze Age hyperbole. For instance, the Eastern Anatolian king, Anumhibri, circa 1800 BC, claimed that the enemy destroyed 12 of his towns, and Hittite texts record similar claims. If the Greeks had originally hoped to terrify Troy into surrender when they landed, they failed. But when Troy made its strategy of forward defense work, the Greeks employed a counter-strategy of slow strangulation. They raided Trojan territory, especially beyond the well-defended plain of Troy, and they carried off two sorts of operations: ambushes on civilians outside Troy's walls, and assaults on Trojan settlements and nearby cities friendly to Troy. The Greek camp at Troy had several functions, and one of them was that of naval station. It made a convenient jumping-off place for attacks, because they enjoyed command of the sea. The Greeks could strike the long Trojan coastline virtually at will. So they ransacked cities, carried off Trojan women, treasure and livestock, killed some leading men, ransomed others, and sold most of the rest as slaves on the islands of Lemnos, Imbros, and Samos. The Greeks were not the only sea raiders of the era. Pharaoh Amenhotep III, for example, had trouble with Shardana pirates. The Lycians of southwestern Anatolia were another group with a reputation for piracy. Amenhotep's son, Pharaoh Akhenaten, was plagued by Lycian sea raiders who seized Greek Egyptian towns year after year. Akhenaten accused the Cypriot king of providing aid and comfort to the Lycians. Greek plundering raids, of which the Iliad offers many anecdotes, served several purposes. Loot was a moral booster for the for wavering Greek soldiers. The raids offered a break from the boredom of camp life. Most important, More important, the raid secured food and fodder for the poorly supplied Greek forces. For example, Odysseus and his men stormed and sacked the city of Ismarus in Thrace, a Trojan ally, and this was just on their way home. Livestock loomed large in late Bronze Age lists of booty. Egyptian, Mesopotamian, and Hittite texts, for example, often listed as a coveted prize of war. Among the Greeks, raiding cattle, horses, and sheep was honourable, profitable, and violent. When Atarasea, perhaps Atreus, attacked the kingdom of Maduwata in southwestern Anatolia around 1400 BC, he targeted cattle and sheep. Homer mentions various wars in Greece fought over cattle thieving, and it is not unusual for noblemen to die in the process. Helen's brother, for example, the Spartan prince Castor, was killed in one such raid, and cattle raiding could disrupt an enemy's economy and society. For example, one Melanippus, son of Hecataeon, was a kinsman of Hector and an important figure in the town of Percote on the Dardanelles. When the Greeks came after his cattle, he prudently moved to Troy and was put up by Priam. Melanippus saved his skin and lived to fight in the Trojan army, but it was no longer a force of law and order in Percote, assuming that the town survived a visit by the Greeks. Slaving was lucrative as well. Anatolian slaves were prized in Greece, no doubt in part because of the stereotypes about slavish Easterners that were common in classical Greece. But Anatolians fetched high prices in the Bronze Age for a more practical reason. In general, they were better educated, more sophisticated, and more highly skilled than ordinary Greeks. Civilization had deeper roots in the East than in Greece. Literacy was more widespread. Cities more common. Myth records that Greeks imported engineers from Lycia to build the stunning fortification walls of the city of Tiryns in the Peloponnesus. Achilles once described the attacks on the cities as a matter of making war on other men over their women. But he was speaking to Agamemnon then, and bitter over their quarrel about a woman. Captive women feature prominently on Egyptian and Hittite booty lists, as well as on linear B tablets that inventory the wealth of Greek kings, and yet women were only a small part of the loot that the Greeks amassed. It's a unfortunate part of reality back then. Finally, the assaults on other cities hurt Troy, which had connections of marriage and presumably of friendship and alliances with at least some of them. Some had given Troy expensive gifts of gold and silver, and others might have sold supplies to the beleaguered city. Of the towns that Achilles sacked, 11 were in the vicinity of Troy. Greeks attacks harassed citizens and insulted Trojan honor, and they picked off vulnerable allies. Unable to lay siege to Troy, the Greeks inflicted an indirect punishment on it. How many people, like Melanippus of Percote, left the countryside for safety behind the great city's walls? As a practical matter, only those who, like him, had family in Troy, to support them, could have afforded food and shelter in the big city. Most people would probably have needed to rely on local strongholds, which lacked the security of Troy's ramparts, hoping that the Greeks did not come to their corner of the Troad. But there were surely some refugees in Troy, an excess population that could have only increased pressure on the infrastructure of the town. Needless to say, the Greeks considered it fair game to attack any Trojan civilian who ventured out to do business, even women going to the spring to fetch water. Homer mentions 2 springs of the Scamander River that flowed into basins, where Trojan dames, ere yet alarmed by Greece, washed their fair garments in the days of peace. This is reminiscent of the Canaanite Cirta epic, 1300 BC, in which women flee from the woods, threshing floors, springs, and fountains for shelter in the cities and towns when the enemy invades, like locusts. We hear nothing about Trojan counter-expeditions to defend the cities that the Greeks attacked. Either they lacked the resources to protect any place except their home territory, or Homer had left out the initial details. Has left out the initial details. Archaeology shows that two towns at the southern end of the Trojan plain were fortified. They were located outside the entrance to a pass that led southward through the hills of the Mount Ida Massif. Conceivably, Trojan soldiers manned these forts and sallied out to attack Greeks travelling overland. But the Greeks seem to have had no such worries farther away from Troy, on the periphery of the Troad. Taking Troy was hard work. Taking Thebes under Plakos was a romp in the meadow. And I will just pull up an image of the Troad. Or is this the one? Yes. Oh, way big, way big. So we can see some of these areas that they're talking about. We can see the Scamander River just underneath Troy, and we can imagine where there are springs here where the women would collect things. We can see the various, some cities anyway, Conalay, Chirce, where the Greeks probably would have raided. And we can see where apparently Thebes under Plakos may have been, and where these, right by Mount Ida, where these supposed forts may have been. Years after the war, King Nestor of Pylos remembered Achilles as having shone especially in the sea raids. And well he might have, since Nestor profited from one such raid on the island of Tenedos, from the spoils of which Nestor was awarded the lovely Hecamede, as hostess, servant, and bedmate. She was the daughter of a great man named Arsinus, and she had beautiful hair and divine looks. A Roman-era collection of myths names 17 cities that Achilles is supposed to have sacked, and adds that there were many others, but this late source cannot be trusted. Much better to follow the Iliad, which specifies 6 of the cities attacked by Achilles. Besides Thebes under Plakos, they were Lyarnessus and Pedasus, both in the Troad, and Lesbos, Tenedos, and Skyros. All islands, and presumably the main town, is meant in each instance, as Homer specifies in the case of Skyros. On the east coast of Lesbos, excavation turned up a Bronze Age city at Thermae that was violently destroyed in the 1200s. Each of the islands supplied a beautiful woman to one of the Greek heroes. In addition to Nestor's Hecamede, there were Iphis, a Scythian woman who slept with Patroclus, and Diomede, daughter of Phorbas of Lesbos, who was with Achilles, at least in the absence of his favourite female Briseis. Among the many trophies in Agamemnon's collection were 7 beautiful women from Lesbos. Again, it's so interesting that the archaeology seems to at times line up with at least some of the more general points regarding Homer's account. At least in some ways, anyway. That the which city was it? That a Lesbos city was destroyed in around the time that the war supposedly took place, and it is mentioned as a place that Achilles had attacked. You know, it's kind of amazing. It is a good guess that the weapons used in the attacks on the islands were naval pikes, which the Greeks carried on their ships for sea battles. These were long spears, allegedly 40 feet, jointed by iron rings and tipped with bronze points. Naval battles in the Bronze Age are not well documented, but it is clear that they were mainly attacks on personnel rather than attempts to destroy ships. This is suggested by recently discovered fragmentary images from Greek vases of the 1100s BC. Perhaps the earliest recorded naval battle took place between Hittite and Cypriot ships during the reign of Hittite king Shupaluluma II. but no details survive. Around the same time, 1187, there was a battle between Egyptian ships and those of the Sea People, and it is well illustrated on a sculpted Egyptian relief. Both sides' vessels carry archers and marines armed with pikes, swords, and shields. The prows of the Sea People's ships have posts ending in duck-bill-shaped projections, and these may have served as a kind of ram. The Egyptians are supported by archers on shore as well. A different source, Minoan and Mycenaean images of sieges, shows ships approaching fortified cities and men drowning, presumably battle casualties. On the mainland, Lyrnessus and Pedasus were taken on the same operation as Thebes under Plakos. And we can see in the image here where these supposedly would have been. Down at the very bottom of the image we see Pedasus, Lyrnessus, and Thebes under Plakos. And see if they were moving swiftly, various different groups could easily hit these quite quickly. None of these sites have been securely identified, but Homer does supply some hints, so it is an educated guess that all three cities were on the northern shore of the Gulf of Edremit. It was no doubt after killing the princes that Achilles led the Greeks to sack Thebes under Plakos. In theory, the Greeks could have reached the city on foot from their camps at Troy, but in between lies rugged country. It would have been easier, faster, and cheaper to go by sea. Safer, too, since the Trojans could not stop the Greek navy. Once again, the superiority of the Greeks' navy, that ability to control the sea, is such an important part. Feel my throat getting a little scraggy. Located in Mysia, the town gave its name to what was then called the Plain of Thebes, today the Plain of Edremit. Achilles calls the town the Holy City of Aetion, after the king, or Aethion. Aethion is probably a non-Greek name. Homer calls the people whom Aethion rules Kilikkians, not to be confused with the better-known Kilikkians of southern Anatolia. That might be pronounced Cilician nowadays, but we'll trust the hard K of the Greek. Plakos, at whose foot Thebes sat, was a wooded mountain, perhaps a spur of Mount Ida. To conquer Thebes under Plakos, Achilles would have needed a detachment of ships and men that were large enough to take on a fair-sized town without depleting Greek forces at their beachhead camp, and leaving them vulnerable to attack. The Trojans never took advantage of the enemy's temporary weakness. Whether they missed their chance or whether the Greeks carefully kept troop strength high at their camp by sending out only small groups, we do not know. Another possibility is successful deception. For instance, the Greeks might have lit extra fires at night to hide their raiders' absence. Did Alexander the Great do similar? I believe he may have. I think he used, if I'm remembering correctly, I think it might have been against the Indian king. I can't remember his name, but I could swear at least someone did that at one point. One of the great conquerors. An educated guess is that Thebes under Plakos was a city of 1,000 people that could muster around 300 fighting men. Although described as high-gated, Thebes under Plakos fortifications are not likely to have presented much of a challenge compared to those of Troy. Imagine that the Greeks enjoyed manpower superiority of 3 to 1, a comfortable if not huge advantage. In that case, the Greeks would have needed 900 men, or 18 pentaconters, assuming pentaconters are the 50 oared ships, if you don't remember, assuming the soldiers did their own rowing. In addition to spearmen, the Greek force would have required archers and slingers to provide covering fire for the soldiers assaulting the city. Excuse me. They would have also needed ladders, which would be raised and climbed by veterans of earlier assaults. In the best case scenario, they would have also brought a battering ram. In any case, the mission to Thebes under Placos was a success. Quote, "We destroyed it and brought everything here to the camp at Troy," said Achilles afterwards. It began with the longships putting out from the shore at Troy and heading south. They would have rounded the rocky coast of Cape Lecton, oars striking rhythmically, heading eastward along the southern shore of the Troad. Heading eastward along the southern shore of the Troad, they would have had to their starboard the island of Lesbos, its outline shimmering in the day's heat. They would have passed scrub-covered hills and sheer grey cliffs, and heard the distant braying of donkeys. They would have passed the dry gullies of the summer months, when the snow had long disappeared from the slopes of Mount Ida above. Finally, they would have reached Mysia. The Myrmidons would have leapt off the vessels as they were anchoring, following their chief Achilles, towards the walled Acropolis on the hill above. When the Greeks took Thebes under Placos, Achilles killed King Aethon. Achilles is said to have shown respect to the man's corpse, which he cremated along with the king's armour, and then buried under a mound of earth. Considering the usual practice of stripping an enemy's armour, this showed high respect. Was Achilles' gesture a nod towards Aethon's in-laws? The king's son-in-law was Hector, who had married Aethon's daughter, Andromache, and brought her to Troy. "The distant Trojans never injured me," Achilles said in protest to Agamemnon later on. He spoke out of anger, but his chivalry to the dead Aethon suggests that Achilles meant it. And that's a very interesting thing to find out, because I think, as it was brought up later, Achilles sort of mangles the corpse of Hector after his dear friend and potential lover Patroclus is killed. As for the other men of Thebes under Placos who survived the battle, the few wealthiest might be ransomed, some of the others would be sold into slavery, and the rest would be slaughtered. The women and children would be enslaved, the beautiful women from noble houses would become mistresses of the Greek heroes, while others, we might guess, were forced to serve as camp women. The Greeks took all of the king's treasures, aside from his armour. We know of 2 items that Achilles kept: a lyre and an iron weight, used in athletic contests. In the Bronze Age, iron was relatively rare and expensive. As for the lyre, Achilles enjoyed sitting in his hut at Troy and playing the clear-toned instrument. The well-wrought harp from conquered Thebae came, of polished silver was its costly frame. With this he soothes his angry soul and sings the immortal deeds of heroes and of kings. Achilles also acquired a superb horse named Pedasos. The queen of Thebes under Placos was exchanged for a hefty ransom, no doubt paid by her Trojan in-laws. Andromache and Hector took in the ransomed queen, but she died in their house, of Artemis's arrows. That is, perhaps of a heart attack or stroke. That's a really interesting way of describing Artemis's arrows, which makes sense. They're suddenly they are stopped as if they're hit by an arrow and instantly killed. The Trojan connection gave the Greeks an additional motive for sacking Thebes under Placos. The city was probably a Trojan ally, supplying gifts or intelligence or rendering some other service, although apparently it did not send soldiers. The destruction of Thebes under Placos deprived Troy of logistical support and struck a blow against morale. One of the captive women was a visitor from a nearby city. Chersias, daughter of Cherses, came from the city of Circe. I'm sorry if you guys could just see the text right now. But we can see Chiersey. Chiersey is what I'm going to call it. It's like reading the same name over and over. Chierseus, daughter of Chierses, came from the city of Chiersey in the southwestern Troad, about 25 miles from the Thebes under Plakos. According to an ancient commentary on Homer, she had come to visit the queen of Thebes under Plakos for a religious function, which is appropriate since her father was an important priest of the god Apollo. The unlucky girl was shipped off to the Greek camps, where she was given to Agamemnon. It would prove to be a fatal connection, indirectly responsible for a quarrel between Agamemnon and Achilles and its bloody consequences. But at the time, the Greeks might have looked at the capture of Chierseus as a real coup. Learnesus also fell to the Greeks on the Thebes under Plakos campaign. As at Thebes under Plakos, the assault began with a cattle raid. Achilles caught a very big man among the livestock, Aeneas, son of Anchises, prince of the junior branch of the royal house of Troy, and a leader in battle and council. We may imagine the scene. Aeneas had been standing unarmed in the countryside, checking his cattle, the mainstay of his wealth, when the enemy arrived without warning. Suddenly Aeneas might have envisioned his fat heifers and thick-necked bulls slipping through his fingers as weightlessly as gold dust. But there was no time to cry, unless he leapt down the paths of sacred Mount Ida, his linen tunic fluttering out behind him, his leather sandals flying over rocks and tree roots. The massive Greek warrior behind him would have thrust his bronze-tipped spear into the Trojan's back. Normally, Aeneas was a lion in battle, who could slice through a man's throat with his spear, but with Achilles after him, he had to race down the hill like a runaway slave girl. Miraculously, he outran Achilles, all the way to Learnesus. As Aeneas explained afterwards, Zeus preserved me. He roused my courage and my nimble knees. Aeneas escaped Achilles, but the people of Learnesus did not. We can imagine their struggle as well. The arms of the Greeks stretched over the countryside, and then fell onto the town. Not that the men who attacked it knew what Learnesus was called or cared. Chances are that they were drunk, scared, homesick, and eager to take it all out on the enemy. The men of Learnesus stood before the gate, more steadfast than a row of bricks. The Greeks unleashed a storm of arrows and slingstones that pushed the defenders back. The Lernesians prayed to the god Corunta, lord of the stag and their protector, but he had already abandoned them. They could not stop the enemy from hacking at the town gate, or from dragging their ladders up against the walls. A blare of horns, a volley of arrows, a roar as the Greeks topped the battlements, and it was over. The defenders died choking on their blood, or staring with terror at a severed arm, or curling up beside a dying horse with a spear-torn belly. The Greeks surely found killing exhausting work, especially having rode to Learnesus in the hot sun. They also had their own dead and wounded to look after. Some soldiers tended their comrades' injuries with herbs and bandages. A surgeon operated on a man with a grave head wound. The only hope was to drain the swollen cranium by removing a portion of the skull. Known as trepanning, it was an ancient procedure and a desperate one. It rarely worked. The other Greeks dealt with the defeated. There were livestock to round up and jewels to loot. Any Lernesian males who had surrendered were sold into slavery on the Aegean Islands. The women were dragged off as prizes of war. Their future lay in hauling water jugs from Greek wells, weaving wool on Greek looms, and warming the beds of the Greek warriors who had destroyed their lives. Their last memories of home was the sight of their menfolk's corpses stripped naked by Greek scavengers and already attracting flies. Achilles killed 2 princes at Lernesius, Mynes and Epistrophus, both of whom died fighting in a battle of spears. Their father, Evenus, son of Selipades, and king of Lyrnessus, was presumably killed as well. Achilles also slew three brothers of the noblewoman Briseis, who saw them die, as well as Mynes, who appears to have been her husband. In Homer, Briseis, Helen, Andromache, and Hecuba all watch battles from the wall. Meinonian and Mycenaean art also show women doing so. A relief on a silver drinking cup from Mycenae depicts 6 women looking out at the fighting, waving and gesturing in excitement to the men below. But would real women in the Bronze Age have played such an assertive role, and such a risky one, where they might have been hit by an enemy arrow? Probably yes. When the pharaoh Kamose, around 1550 BC, took a fleet up the Nile to attack the city of Avaris, he saw the enemy's women peering out at him from the walls. Better documented later periods of ancient Greek history offers a few examples of women spectators during a siege. Nor should we discount the moral value to the defenders of seeing their women on the walls. Indeed, both sides in Homer evoke the women and families for whom they are fighting. The presence of women also served as a taunt to the enemy. Briseis was taken captive along with the other women of Lyrnessus. She ended up as Achilles' mistress. As she was led off, Briseis wept. She couldn't get over the horror. Having witnessed the deaths of her 3 brothers and her husband, she would have to sleep with their then killer. But Patroclus comforted her, as she said to him later, "Thy friendly hand upreared me from the plain, and dried my sorrows for a husband slain." Patroclus promised Briseis a high status, saying that Achilles would bring her to Greece and marry her. This was generous and no doubt astute, since Patroclus knew Achilles well enough to recognize a woman who could win the hero's heart. Achilles' conduct during these raids says a lot about the laws of war, such as they were in late Bronze Age. Achilles might well have nodded in approval at the Hittite king Hattusili's description of a victory. Quote, "I trampled the country of Hassuwa like a lion, and like a lion I slew it. And I brought dust down upon them, and I took all their possessions with me, and filled Hattusa with it." Or as Pharaoh Seti I, 1294 to 1279 BC, put it, "An instant of trampling the foe is better than a day of jubilation." For Seti, trampling meant slaughter, annihilation, and filling valleys with corpses stretched out in their own blood. And he specifically singles out for the slaughter heirs as well as their fathers. The troops of Pharaoh Merneptah took more than 9,000 hands and the troops of Pharaoh Merneptah took more than 9,000 hands and penises as trophies in a battle in 1208 with Libyan aggressors, common practice in late Bronze Age Egypt. Some interesting trophies. The Assyrian king Shalmaneser I boasted of having 14,400 enemy captives blinded, or, as some say, just having the right eye cut out. Judging by such acts, the Greeks were not especially brutal. They were playing by the rules of the day. By Seti's rules, killing heirs was common sense, and that was reason enough for Achilles to mow down the 7 royal brothers outside Thebes and Arplakos, but they were hardly an immediate threat. The herdsmen's princes might have carried daggers for protection, but as far as we know, they were otherwise unarmed. Did Achilles and the Myrmidons deliberately attack and kill civilians? By today's standards, Achilles might well be judged a war criminal. But we must remember that the princes of Thebes and Arplakos were not civilians, but potential soldiers who could have put on their armor in minutes. Achilles had every right to round them up and even kill them if they continued to resist or if no guards were available. No doubt he would have kept the princes alive if possible, since the usual princes since his usual practice was not to kill his enemies, but rather to ransom them, or to sell them into slavery on one of the Aegean islands. As Achilles explains late in the war, after he had turned more brutal, I used to like to spare Trojans, and I took many alive and sold them. A case in point in the Trojan prince, Lycaon, one of Priam's sons. Achilles ambushed the lad one night, while Lycaon was in the royal orchard outside Troy, furtively cutting young figwood to use as chariot rails. In other words, Lycaon was on a military mission. Achilles' operation was a stakeout. It brought little glory, but potentially a lot of profit, and the great Achilles did not hesitate to stoop to conquer. Lycaon was a valuable commodity. Achilles spared the boy and sold him for a good price, 100 oxen, as well as a gift to Patroclus of a Phoenician silver mixing bowl. The buyer was a Greek nobleman, Euneus on Lemnos, son of the famous Jason the Argonaut. But luckily for Lycaon, a family friend stepped in. Aethon of the island of Imbros ransomed Lycaon for 300 oxen, which means that the Lemnian made a hefty profit, assuming that the Phoenician silver bowl cost considerably less than 200 oxen. Once freed, Lycaon took ship for Arisbe, a city on the Dardanelles, and then made his way home to Troy. Lycaon was not a civilian, and he would not have been better off if he had been, since civilians had few rights in Bronze Age warfare. If his city was conquered and he was caught, a civilian would be lucky to suffer mere slavery and not death. But it was better not to be caught, even if that meant heading to the hills. Consider, for example, the people of Apasa, probably the later Ephesus, capital of the western Anatolian kingdom of Arzawa, when it was conquered by the Hittite king Marshilish II around 1315 BC. Most of the population fled, many of them to nearby Mount Arananda, probably today's Samsun Dag, the classical Mount Mycale. This is a long and high summit, climbing from sea level to 4,000 feet. Marshilish reports that the terrain was too rocky and overgrown for ascending on horseback, so his army went after the refugees on foot, allegedly with the king himself in the lead. It was, says King Marshilish, a battle against the mountain, and the king won. The loser, of course, was not the mountain, but the huge mass of Arzawan refugees, the bulk of whom, says Marshilish, were starved out. Before winter came, the Arzawans surrendered, even though they no doubt knew what lay ahead. Like other conquered peoples before them, they would be shipped back to Hatti as deportees, a class of unfree labourers condemned to menial work, they and their children. Marshilish says the total number of deportees was beyond measure, but the royal share alone came to 6,200 people. Whereas booty, whatever booty the Greeks grabbed on their raids belonged to the entire army and not to individuals. It was shared according to the number of men who had participated in the action, with the leader entitled to an extra cut. Each man's share was known as his geras, his gift of honor or prize. But sometimes it was a poison gift. Fights over the division of spoils are documented in later Greek history, and so were mutinies by sailors over their pay. When towards the end of the war, a quarrel over plunder broke out in the Greek camp, probably few people were surprised. Raiding was a mixed blessing for the Greeks. It prolonged the war, and protracted wars are often as hard on the attacker as on the defender. The Greeks may have amassed mountains of loot in their beach camp, but the walls of Troy stood as strong as ever. The result would have been frustration, exhaustion, and anger among the attackers. Although he is one of the few who remained optimistic, Agamemnon nicely summarizes the Greek army's gloom. Now shameful flight alone can save the host, or blood, or treasures, and our glory lost. And that is the end of that chapter. Chapter 6, which we will read another time, talks about an army in trouble. So those were another 2 chapters down. We just finished page 100. So we are making good pace with this book. The book itself is roughly about 189 pages long. So in actuality, well, probably including the introduction, it's probably about 200, if a little bit over. So I would say we are now over halfway through the book. For those of you who sat through and listened, or for those of you who are listening during the VOD, whether it be for sleep, for the history, or as background noise for for working, I'd like to thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about Greece. I think... what should I do? Should I raid someone? Who is on? Is anyone on? What I will say is, I think my next stream will not be a reading stream. I think I'm going to try and do... I'll just take this off. I think I'm going to try and do a gaming stream, playing a little bit of Binding of Isaac. I spent a little bit of time working on getting a simple gaming setup on OBS ready, so hopefully that should be nice. But that is for another day. I think... Who to raid? Oh, I know. I think I will raid Kankuro. Kankuro is a very cool puppet VTuber. Very nice guy, very supportive, and has been kind of helped me get introduced to a lot of people. So, yeah, he's very cool. So yeah, let me just go through the whole process of doing that, the raidy thingy. How do I do this again? Oh yeah, I just click raid. Why isn't this... Oh, there he is. For some reason it wasn't showing up. But once again, thank you for listening. Gorev Matagut, Slong of Oil. Oh, did he just end his stream? Is that why there was an issue? Or maybe it's... No matter. I think I'll just end the stream. Thank you all. Goodbye.